There is a certain diet that for many years has been considered beneficial for the heart. It is believed to lower blood pressure, protect blood vessels from atherosclerosis, and reduce the risk of heart attack. But here's what is interesting. The very same diet, under certain conditions, does not protect against stroke at all, and only creates an illusion of safety. Sounds strange? Today I want to calmly break down why the same diet can be both a medicine and a poison, what the studies that many people still cite have actually shown, and what new science from 2024-2025 has added. And in the end, it will become clear which specific diet can actually end in a stroke, and you will learn many other interesting findings. The literature has long included studies showing that balanced plant-based nutrition is associated with a reduced risk of cardiovascular diseases. However, not all plant-based diets are equivalent in terms of nutritional value, as well as the level of food processing. For example, in the Spanish pre-dimed study, Prevención con Dieta Mediterránea, which you can see on the screen, Martínez González et al. Found that over an average follow-up period of 5 years, people with the highest adherence to a vegetarian diet had lower cardiovascular mortality. Satya et al. Conducted a similar analysis of the Nurses' Health Study and the Health Professionals' Follow-Up Study in the United States, and found that the more plant-based food participants consumed, the fewer cases of coronary heart disease there were. However, these studies suffered from major limitations. They often compared people following restrictive vegetarian or vegan diets with non-vegetarians. Subsequently, studies appeared that deliberately took into account the level of processing of plant-based foods in relation to cardiovascular disease risk. For example, a study conducted in the EPIC-NL cohort examined the relationship between healthy and unhealthy plant-based diets and all-cause mortality. In this study, it was reported that if a person consumed little or a moderate amount of ultra-processed food, then adding vegetables, whole grains, and nuts to the diet actually worked. Mortality risk decreased. But the magic disappeared when a person tried to eat healthy plant foods, while the volume of industrially processed food was off the charts. A healthy diet stopped protecting their life. A second study conducted in the UK Biobank cohort examined, using indicators, the role of unprocessed and processed plant-based foods in relation to cardiovascular diseases. An increase in the proportion of unprocessed plant-based foods by 10% was associated with a 7% reduction in the risk of cardiovascular disease and a 13% reduction in cardiovascular mortality, while higher consumption of processed animal-based foods was associated with a 6% increase in cardiovascular disease risk. However, these studies did not analyze the proportion of healthy and unhealthy plant-based foods, limited consumption of animal products, and the level of food processing. However, a new large-scale study from 2025, based on the French NutriNet-Santé cohort, showed that a plant-based diet in itself is not yet a guarantee of health. The key factor turned out to be the degree of food processing. Unlike previous studies, their approach was aimed at a more comprehensive assessment of plant-based diets by developing new dietary indices that jointly take into account the balance between plant and animal foods, their nutritional value, and their degree of processing. More than 63,000 participants took part in the study, of whom 24% were men and 76% were women. The average age of participants at the start of the study was about 51 years. The follow-up period was 9 years. Not all plants are equally beneficial. The authors of the article note that the modern market is overflowing with ultra-processed products. Even if a product is plant-based, for example, vegan nuggets, sweet breakfast cereals, or store-bought bread with additives, it may be more harmful to the heart than minimally processed meat. 4 types of diets. The researchers divided participants' diets into combinations based on 2 criteria: product quality, healthy versus unhealthy, and degree of processing, natural versus ultra-processed. This resulted in 4 main dietary groups: healthy natural food, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, seeds, eggs, milk, as well as mushrooms and seaweed in their natural form. Healthy ultra-processed, plant-based products with a good composition, low sugar and salt, but subjected to deep industrial processing, for example, fortified soy desserts, a vegan protein bar with a good composition but a lot of emulsifiers, or store-bought whole grain bread with 20 additives in the ingredient list. Unhealthy natural, potatoes, white rice, homemade fruit juices without sugar, but without industrial additives. They are high in starch or fast sugars. This is a minus, but they have not been processed. Unhealthy, ultra-processed. These are the alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages we love so much. Sweet or salty snacks, chips, processed meat products, sweets, fast food, and any other products that include a large number of chemical names unfamiliar to us. Colorants, color stabilizers, flavorings, flavor enhancers, sweeteners. The numbers speak for themselves. Scientists saw that these two intermediate groups, healthy processed and unhealthy natural, showed no protection for the cardiovascular system. In simple terms, if you buy expensive vegan food labeled healthy, but it has gone through deep industrial processing, you are not protecting your heart. You are simply in the same risk zone as a person who eats regular white rice and potatoes. They observed significant results only at the extremes, if people ate only healthy and natural food, and if they ate only unhealthy and industrial food. In individuals most strictly adhering to an unhealthy and ultra-processed plant-based diet, the risk of cardiovascular disease overall was 38% higher, and the risk of ischemic heart disease was as much as 46% higher. This looks dangerous to me. Whereas stricter adherence to a healthy and unprocessed plant-based diet was associated with a 32% reduction in overall cardiovascular disease incidence and a 44% reduction in ischemic heart disease risk. This already sounds like salvation. Now about the long-awaited stroke. Here is what is interesting. Adherence to one diet or the other did not affect the development of cerebrovascular diseases, specifically stroke. We read, no association was found between any of the indices and cerebrovascular diseases. This means that a healthy plant-based diet does not reduce the risk of stroke, unfortunately. Similar data were also noted by researchers in 2021, when they found a reduced risk of CVD and ischemic heart disease, but not stroke, among adherents of plant-based diets. I also think you will find it interesting to know that according to this study, if you replace at least 10% of consumed food with healthy plant-based food, and then with ultra-processed animal food, the results turn out to be different. In the first group, in the long term, the risk of cardiovascular disease decreased by 10%, and the risk of ischemic heart disease by 11%. Not bad, right? But in the second group, who added sausages, frankfurters, or pâtés, for example, the overall risk of cardiovascular disease increased by 24%, and the risk of ischemic heart disease increased by as much as 25%. That is already a lot. And here it is important what exactly was replaced with healthy plant-based food in the first group. It turns out that if the replacement was from ultra-processed plant-based food to healthy plant-based food, this did not significantly affect the state of the cardiovascular system in the future. Therefore, if you replace cookies and factory-made buns with vegetables, fruits, and grains, 10% will not improve the situation. But if you replace even unprocessed animal food, for example boiled meat, with healthy plant-based food, this will reduce the risk of heart attack and ischemic heart disease in the long term. It turns out, as we see in this study, that even if your diet is perfectly balanced in terms of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, according to strict British standards, you will lose weight more effectively by choosing natural foods. The study showed that people who avoided ultra-processing lost more weight and excess fat than those who ate the same nutrients, but in the form of industrial chemistry. This once again proves that our metabolism responds not to the numbers in a calorie table, but to the whole structure of the product. The authors verified that all the results of their studies are relevant for both men and women. Sex does not affect the relationship between the indices and the occurrence of cardiovascular diseases. How can these studies be explained? Ultra-processing changes the structure of food, the food matrix. Even if the composition is high in fiber, industrial additives, flavorings, a high degree of grinding, and thermal processing can lead to faster absorption of sugars, disruption of the gut microbiota, microinflammation in blood vessels. Yes, a healthy plant-based diet is not a panacea for strokes, and this is an honest scientific fact. But it remains the most powerful tool against heart attack and ischemic heart disease if you choose real food rather than its high-tech imitation. However, it is important to remember, if you decide to completely exclude meat products from your diet, this issue must be approached thoughtfully. Transitioning to a plant-based diet is not just about giving up meat, but a complex restructuring of the entire nutrient intake system. Without competent compensation of critically important elements, such a step can become dangerous for health. We should carefully reconsider our refrigerator before it harms us. See you in the next video.